There's a moment in every industry when everyone agrees on the answer. When the debate is considered settled, when anyone who questions the consensus is dismissed as out of touch, behind the times, or simply wrong. In the car industry, that moment arrived quietly but firmly. The future was electric. Batteries, charging networks, ranges, kilowatt hours. That was the conversation. That was the only conversation. And any company not fully committed to that path was seen as a company slowly fading into irrelevance. Mazda was one of those companies, small by global standards, roughly 1.2 million cars a year in a world where Toyota moves 10 million, a brand known more for how its cars feel to drive than for how many units it ships. And when Mazda discontinued its last rotary engine car, the RX-8, even its most loyal fans accepted that a chapter had closed. The rotary engine, that strange, triangular, spinning alternative to everything conventional, was finished. A fascinating footnote. A beautiful failure. Except Mazda never actually stopped working on it. While the press releases dried up and the world moved on, small teams inside Mazda's engineering labs kept going. No announcements, no leaks, no investor presentations built around it. Just quiet, methodical work on an engine that the rest of the industry had already buried. And what they were, building wasn't a revival of the past, it was something the EV industry never saw coming. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what Mazda actually is, because the size of this company is part of the story. Mazda doesn't have the budget of Volkswagen or the scale of Toyota. It can't afford to bet on multiple futures simultaneously. When Mazda commits to something, it commits with everything it has. That's not a strength most people associate with small companies. But it's also not a weakness. It's a filter. It forces the question, is this actually right, or are we just following the crowd? Mazda has asked that question before. In the 1990s and early 2000s, when the company was struggling financially and relying on Ford for support, it didn't respond by chasing volume. It responded by narrowing its focus. Fewer models, better engineering. A philosophy it eventually called SkyActiv, a complete rethink of engines, gearboxes, and body structures from the ground up. Not electrification, not hybridization, just making internal combustion work better than anyone thought it still could. It worked. Mazda rebuilt its reputation car by car. But here's what that history actually tells you. Mazda is a company that survives by refusing to accept the framing other people give it. When the industry said small brands need to chase volume, Mazda chased quality. When the industry said combustion is dead, Mazda asked a different question. Not, how do we go electric? But what problem are we actually trying to solve? And this is where the rotary engine re-enters the story. Because understanding why the rotary failed the first time is the only way to understand why what Mazda has built now is fundamentally different. The rotary engine is not complicated in concept. Instead of pistons moving up and down, a triangular rotor spins in a continuous circular motion. Fewer moving parts, less vibration. Remarkably compact for the power it produces. When it first appeared, it genuinely looked like the future. Smooth, fast, almost surgically precise in the way it delivered power. Mazda embraced it when no one else would. The RX-7, the RX-8, racing victories that shouldn't have been possible for a company that size. For a period, the rotary wasn't just a Mazda engine. It was Mazda's identity. But identity doesn't fix mechanical reality. The apex seals, the small components that maintain compression inside the rotor, wore down faster than anyone wanted to admit. Fuel consumption was high, not because the concept was flawed, but because combustion inside a rotary chamber was harder to control precisely. Emissions regulations tightened, and the rotary struggled to comply. The ownership experience for every day. Drivers became expensive and unpredictable. Manufacturers looked at this data and reached a conclusion. The rotary engine is a dead end. Mazda looked at the same data and asked a different question. What if the problem isn't the engine itself, but the role we've been asking it to play? That question sat at the center of years of quiet engineering work. And it only starts to make sense once you understand what's actually wrong with electric vehicles, not what EV critics say on the internet. The real problems, the ones that show up not in spec sheets, but in daily life. Here is what most people don't say out loud about EVs. Charging a battery to usable levels takes time that internal combustion never required. Not minutes. Tens of minutes on a fast charger. Hours on a standard one. For city driving with a predictable routine, that's manageable. For anything else, it requires planning that petrol never demanded. Battery packs are heavy. Genuinely, structurally heavy. The kind of weight that changes how a car sits on the road, how it handles rough surfaces, how the tires wear. The weight is distributed low, which helps handling in some ways, but it doesn't disappear. It's always there. Range figures in marketing materials and range in real-world conditions are different numbers. Highway speeds, air conditioning, cold weather, full passenger loads. These don't just reduce range modestly. In some conditions, they reduce it significantly. And that gap between the number on the brochure and the number on the dashboard is where range anxiety actually lives. Charging infrastructure outside major cities remains genuinely sparse in most of the world. Not improving slowly, sparse now, today, in rural areas of the United States. Across large parts of Asia, South America, Africa, on highways between cities that aren't on the top 10 list of EV adoption markets, the map of charging stations and the map of where people actually drive are not the same map. And then there is battery replacement, the cost that doesn't come up during the purchase conversation. When an EV battery degrades significantly, and they do degrade, replacement costs can reach half the value of the vehicle itself. That number is not a rumor. It is a documented reality that current owners are beginning to encounter. None of this makes EVs a bad technology. In specific contexts, urban commuting, short predictable distances, homes with reliable overnight charging, electric vehicles are genuinely excellent. But the industry has presented EVs as a universal solution, and in the real world, they are not yet that. This matters because it describes precisely the space that Mazda has been engineering toward. Here is what Mazda's new rotary engine actually does, and this is the part that changes the entire frame of the conversation. It doesn't power the wheels. That's the shift. That single design decision is what separates this engine from everything that came before it, and everything most people imagine when they hear the words rotary engine. In Mazda's hybrid system, the electric motor drives the car. The driving experience is what you'd expect from an EV: quiet, smooth, instant response. But behind that experience, operating only when the system calls for it, is a small, lightweight rotary engine whose entire job is to generate electricity, to charge the battery on the move, to extend range without requiring a charging station, to eliminate the anxiety of the empty bar without adding the weight and complexity of a second massive battery pack, because the rotary engine is now operating in a narrow, controlled range, not straining to push a car at highway speeds. Not cycling through the full stress of variable load, the problems that killed it the first time become manageable. Fuel combustion can be precisely controlled because the conditions are consistent. Thermal management works because the operating window is defined. The apex seals last longer because they aren't being asked to survive the same extremes. Mazda didn't fix the rotary engine by making it stronger. They fixed it by changing what they asked it to do, and the result is something that sits in a gap the EV industry created but has not been able to close. A vehicle that drives like an electric car in daily conditions, that handles city traffic without burning fuel, that doesn't require you to plan a long journey around the location of charging stations, that doesn't strand you on a highway because fast chargers are unavailable or occupied or simply not there. The rotary engine isn't fighting electric vehicles, it's covering for them. This is where the global market implications become serious, and they're worth taking seriously even if Mazda remains a small company by volume. The past several years have seen enormous capital committed to a single direction: battery national EV adoption targets, subsidies, regulations, infrastructure investment. Governments have written policies, manufacturers have restructured supply chains, investors have priced in a world where batteries win, and everything else is legacy. That level of commitment creates a particular kind of fragility when an entire industry moves in one direction. It stops stress testing the direction itself. The questions that should be asked: does this work everywhere, for everyone, under every condition? Get quieter, because the answer, officially, is already decided. Mazda's rotary hybrid doesn't need to outsell Tesla to disrupt that certainty. It only needs to work. If it works, other manufacturers who have been quietly hedging will gain permission to say so publicly. Investors will begin pricing in a more fragmented future. Governments will ask whether their evenly policies reflect the actual infrastructure reality of their countries, not just their ambitions. The supply chain implications alone are significant.